Please be seated. Do you ever wonder what happened to the other 9 disciples? I mean, simple math, right? We know there's 12 disciples, 3 get to go up on the mountain. What happens to the other 9? I like to think that they were already out doing the work, right? Jesus sent them 2 by 2s, although that still leaves an odd man out. But nevertheless, right? Maybe they were busy elsewhere, and that's why they didn't get picked. Surely they didn't just get left at the bottom of the mountain, right? To try to do work that they didn't know how to do. See, there's a little more to the story. That could be the theme of my sermon today, because some of the readings didn't quite turn out the way I thought they were going to, but it's okay, we can work with it. In today's gospel, we get a chance to hear not just about what happened at the top of the mountain, but what happened at the bottom of the mountain the next day. I recently read a reflection by the Reverend Debbie Thomas, who used to blog for a long time at Journeying with Jesus. And she was writing about these scripture lessons from many years ago when her son was sick. And not sick like he was home from school and she had to work from home for a day or two, sick like he was in excruciating pain, couldn't get out of bed, nobody knew what was really wrong and whether he'd ever be able to go back to school, that kind of sick. And so when she read this gospel that we read, she gravitated to the part we didn't read and the part we often skip, which is what happened with a man and his son who was sick. And the disciples at the bottom of the mountain were unable to do anything to help him. And Jesus got down there and he was mad. And I don't know why he was mad, right? Because he literally chose his A team, okay? So you left the B team down here, what did you think was going to happen? But I wonder, maybe he was mad at a world in which children are sick, you know? Or maybe he was mad at what they called a large crowd. It says there's a large crowd there, right? All these people were there, and nobody was doing anything to help them. And maybe they're thinking, oh, well, it's the disciples' job. You know, they learned how to heal from Jesus, so they should be able to take care of this. And maybe they were right. Maybe the disciples should have been able to do better. But that's not really an excuse to leave that poor man and his son alone, is it? Even if you don't know what to do, you can still be there and say, I'm sorry, this is awful. I don't know how to help, but I'm here. Because when I think about what happened on the day after the transfiguration, I wonder what happened on the bottom of the mountain when the transfiguration was happening, right? Did they hear that same voice that the 3 special guys got to hear? Did they have any idea that it was God speaking at the top of the mountain? Or was it perhaps, as Reverend Thomas suggested, that the voice of God was also made manifest in the voice of a human father, who was saying the very same things that God was saying at the top of the mountain, but in a totally different circumstance? This is my son. This is my son. Listen to him. Don't leave us alone. Don't abandon us. Don't cast us aside in our misery. Listen to my son. The challenge with encounters of the holy, with the holy, is that they're hard, right? It's hard to understand what's happening to you when you have an experience of something that is beyond you, something that you might call divine, something that you might call God. It doesn't always happen with a voice and coming from the clouds and glowing faces, and it's not always quite that clear, right? But we have these moments where we feel some kind of connection to something beyond us, where we have a sense of something that is more, of something that we are called to be a part of. And that can be terrifying and wonderful, and it sure beats being left at the bottom of the mountain, right? To be with all these people who are struggling, even though you're not quite sure what you can do to help. When Moses went to the top of the mountain, he didn't even know something had changed in him when he encountered God, right? It was other people who were like, whoa, you look weird, dude. Put something over that. And for the rest of his life, at least as far as we know, he couldn't interact with other people without a veil over his face. Is that how faith works, right? I mean, if we have some kind of encounter with God, then we are suddenly look different, right? People can't see us and experience us in the same way. Is it that you can either be up on the top of the mountain with God, or you can be down at the bottom of the mountain with everybody else, and never the two shall meet? As some of you undoubtedly know, in the early days, the Christian church was working very hard to distinguish themselves from the Jewish faith because they were Jewish, right? Paul was Jewish, Jesus was Jewish, right? And they were sort of forming a new way of being, and so it was very important to them to be like, well, we're not like these people. But as you may know, that's had some horrible ramifications, right? So when we say something like, they have a veil over their eyes, and even to this day, they can't see God. Yeah, that's not cool, Paul. I understand that's not what you're trying to get at, but it doesn't really matter because there's no excuse for the way that Jewish people have been treated throughout history. And trying to suggest that they are not as good as us is not helpful in that. The truth of the matter is Jewish people are our cousins, right? We have a shared ancestor. We grew up in different houses. That's how cousins work. So we have plenty in common, and we're not better or worse than that faith tradition or any faith tradition. We're just different. And so in the reading we didn't read, Paul talks about how if we can lift the veil from our own eyes, right? Not worrying about the veil on anybody else's eyes, but if we can lift the veil from our own eyes, then we can see ourselves in God's image. We can see ourselves reflected in the glory of God. Because one of the distinct things about Christianity, different, not better, you heard me there, different, not better, is that we understand that Jesus was an incarnation of God, right? Meaning that God walked on earth with us, and that God shows up in our human life. God is not only something that is separate from us, but also something that is a part of us as individuals and as a community. And we are invited to be a part of what God is doing. Walter Wink, who was a well-known theologian of this recent history and of blessed memory, said that transfiguration means that we have to see the world with different eyes. See, the three special disciples, they went up, they got to see Jesus transfigured, to understand that Jesus was a human and also God. They got to literally see it with their own eyes in a way. But we have to choose to see that way. Walter Wink says we live in a world where there is misery and anguish and suffering, right? Where we're not reading the right lesson from the gospel today is not the worst thing that happens by a long shot. And we have to see the world as a place of healing and forgiveness and transformation. We have to see where it's happening already, where it has happened to us, and where it isn't yet, but we know it can be. We have to see that, even though what is right in front of us might be something different. Because that's the glory of it, really. That's the greatness of it. That God was at the mountaintop and at the bottom with the people. That God shows up wherever we are on that journey. When you're walking a mountain, you don't always know where you're going. You can see out to everywhere, but you don't always know what's right in front of you. And the gift of the transfiguration, the gift of incarnation, of God's presence with us, is that God is with us wherever we are, even when we don't know where we're going. Patty Griffin wrote a great song, which I love very much, and I probably have preached about again before on the Feast of the Transfiguration, called Up to the Mountain. And it's in memory of Martin Luther King Jr.'s final sermon that he gave right before he was assassinated, in which he talked about going to the top of the mountain. There's a line in there that says, sometimes I feel like I've never been nothing but tired. I don't know if that comes from the sermon or not, but I got to tell you, when I had a newborn, I sang that song a lot, okay? Preach, sister, all right? That is what it's like to have a baby. But frankly, that's what it's like to be alive sometimes, right? For many of us, that's how we're feeling right now. There's just a relentless onslaught of suffering and struggling in the world, and what are we meant to do in the face of it when we just feel exhausted? And she spoke to that same idea, which I'm sure King also spoke to in his sermon, about how when you're on the mountain, on the one hand, you see everything, but on the other hand, you only can see what's right in front of you. You can look out to the whole landscape, but you also walk and then it's like, oh, I'm at the top of the mountain, or oh, I have 5,000 more miles to climb. You never do know. But in the song, Griffin speaks to the great love that God has for each of us and the love that we have for God. So when we're exhausted, when we're not sure where we're going, when we're pretty sure we can't go on, we remember the love that God has for us. Whether we are at the top of the mountain, the bottom of the mountain, or somewhere in between. That love of God is our journey, walking with God and knowing that God's love is always with us. We always remember this event of the Transfiguration on the last Sunday before Lent. I figured this is just because we need to make sure we get it in, and that way it always gets read, right? Because, it's a big one. But it occurred to me that maybe we need Transfiguration right before we get to Lent, right? Maybe we need to be reminded that God and what is holy and what is sacred is in every aspect of our ordinary lives. When we can see it and when we can't, when we're sure of it and when we're sure it's not there. Even then, God is with us. Because the journey of Lent is about examining our own lives to see where we are drawing away from God, where we could be moving closer to God. What are the barriers that separate us? Because it's not just about noticing that God is with us. It's about joining in what God is doing. And the first step to that, the number one lesson of the Feast of the Transfiguration, is listen. Listen. Listen to the things that you want to hear and the things that you don't want to hear. Listen to the people you love and the people you don't like that much. Listen to what God is speaking to the way that God's love is showing up in the moments of darkness and the moments of light. Because wherever you are on your journey, God is with you.